It was a quiet evening at a luxury charity gala in Manhattan, New York, the kind of event where every detail was polished to perfection. Crystal chandeliers glowed warmly above the city's elite, reflecting off tailored suits, designer gowns, and carefully practiced smiles. Soft classical music floated through the hall as waiters moved silently between guests. Near the back, almost blending into the shadows, stood Ethan Carter. A reserved single father and U.S. military veteran, he wore a plain black security uniform. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, and no one there knew his name. He was simply doing his job. Ethan's eyes scanned the room with calm discipline, a habit ingrained through years of military service. While others admired artwork and exchanged business cards, he watched posture, breathing, and movement. His thoughts were never fully present at glamorous events like this. Part of him was always elsewhere, usually with his young daughter waiting. At home, security work paid the bills and kept life simple. He preferred it that way. After leaving the military, Ethan had learned to stay invisible, to avoid attention, and to carry his past quietly. Tonight, he expected nothing more than a long shift and an uneventful end. Across the room stood Victoria Hale, a self-made tech millionaire whose success story was well known in business circles. She spoke politely with donazal, as her expression controlled and professional, revealing nothing of her private life. Cameras loved her confidence, but few people truly knew her. Even fewer knew about the rare heart condition she had lived with for years. It was unpredictable, carefully managed, and usually hidden behind discipline and preparation. Tonight, she felt fine, or so she told herself. Events like this were exhausting, but she had attended hundreds before. She believed she was in control. As speeches came to an end and applause rippled across the hall, something shifted. Victoria's smile faltered for half a second, almost unnoticeable. Her hand rose slowly to her chest, as if reacting to a sudden sharp pain. Her breathing grew shallow, her posture stiff. The music stopped mid-note when someone noticed her swaying. Conversations fell into silence. A glass shattered somewhere. Panic crept into the room, spreading faster than anyone could stop it. People stepped back, unsure, frightened, looking for someone else to act. Doctors weren't close, paramedics were minutes away, and in moments like these, minutes could mean everything. Someone shouted for help. Another guest fumbled with a phone. Victoria's vision blurred as the room tilted, her knees weakening. She tried to speak but couldn't find the air. Fear flashed through her mind, sharp and undeniable. She had felt episodes before, but never like this, never so sudden. The carefully controlled world she lived in was slipping away, and she could feel it happening in real time. Ethan saw it instantly. From the back of the room, he had already moved. Years of training kicked in before conscious thought could catch up. He recognized the signs, the posture, the breath, the timing. This wasn't panic or fainting. This was something far more dangerous. As others hesitated, Ethan pushed through the crowd, his voice calm but firm, telling people to give space. He knelt in front of Victoria, his expression focused, almost detached. To him, this was no longer a gala. It was an emergency. In the military, Ethan had learned things most civilians never would. During overseas deployments, he had been trained in rare emergency response techniques used only when no other option existed. Techniques that weren't written in public manuals and weren't meant for ordinary situations. He checked Victoria's responsiveness, listened to her breath, and made a rapid decision. There was no time to explain, no time to ask permission. What mattered was action. Carefully, he supported her head, aligning her airway with practiced precision. Without hesitation, Ethan gently held her face and placed a firm kiss on her lips, applying precise pressure and timing as he had been taught. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic in his mind. It was controlled, intentional, and purposeful. The room gasped in shock. misunderstanding what they were seeing. Phones came out, whispers exploded, but Ethan ignored it all. His focus never left Victoria's face. He counted silently, adjusted slightly, and waited for the response he needed to see. Seconds felt like hours. Then Victoria gasped sharply, her body jerking as air rushed back into her lungs. Her heartbeat steadied beneath Ethan's hand. Color slowly returned to her face. The room exhaled as one. Someone cried. Someone else applauded without realizing it. Ethan leaned back slightly, still supporting her, speaking softly to keep her conscious. He signaled for medical help, his movements calm and efficient. The crisis had passed, but the shock remained, hanging thick in the air. As paramedics finally rushed in, they took over with professional urgency. Victoria was conscious now, confused but alive, her eyes briefly locking with Ethan's. She wanted to speak, to ask who he was, but the moment slipped away as she was placed on a stretcher. Ethan stood up quietly and stepped back, already fading into the background. He adjusted his uniform and returned to his position near the wall. He had just saved her life. But what no one in that glittering hall understood yet was this. Ethan Carter was not just a security guard. He was not just a quiet, single father standing in the shadows. That moment, misunderstood by many, had revealed a truth hidden beneath years of silence and sacrifice. And soon, that truth would change everything. As paramedics arrived and carefully escorted Victoria away on a stretcher, the gala hall buzzed with confusion and unanswered questions. Guests whispered to one another, replaying the moment again and again. Who was the man who had stepped forward without fear? Why did he move with such certainty when everyone else froze? Some assumed he was a doctor, others thought he must be reckless. Ethan Carter, meanwhile, had already stepped back into the shadows, returning to his post as if nothing extraordinary had happened, unaware that the event had quietly shifted the course of his life. By morning, the story had spread through quiet channels. Staff conversations, private messages, discreet inquiries. Victoria woke in a private hospital suite, physically stable, but mentally unsettled. She remembered the panic, the darkness closing in, and then the sudden return of air, life rushing back into her lungs. More than that, she remembered his eyes, calm, focused, without a trace of hesitation. Against her usual instincts, she asked her assistant a simple question. Find him. She needed to know who had saved her when nothing else could. When Ethan arrived later that day, he didn't look like a hero. He wore simple clothes, slightly worn sneakers, and carried his daughter's backpack over one shoulder because he had come straight from dropping her at school. Sitting in the hospital waiting area made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to quiet luxury or private medical floors. When Victoria's assistant finally led him inside, Ethan hesitated briefly at the door, unsure why he was there and half expecting to be told he had broken some rule. Victoria studied him closely as he entered. She had already done her research, and what she found surprised her. Ethan Carter wasn't just a security contractor with a clean record. He was a decorated former special operations medic, trained under programs few civilians ever heard of. His service history was impressive, but much of it was sealed, missions classified, details missing. What stood out most wasn't what he had done, but what he had refused afterward. Private contracts, media attention, financial opportunities. He had turned them all down. Ethan explained very little. He didn't boast or justify his actions. When Victoria thanked him, he simply nodded and said he had done what anyone with his training would have done. He spoke briefly about leaving the military after a series of losses, friends he couldn't save, a marriage that didn't survive the weight of service, and a promise he made to himself to be present for his daughter. Raising her alone had become his mission, a one that mattered more than medals or recognition. His voice was steady, but the weight of his choices was clear. Victoria listened carefully, seeing past the uniform she had once mistaken him for. In her world, people acted for advantage, for visibility, for leverage. Ethan's life followed a different code entirely. That moment at the gala hadn't been dramatic heroism. It had been duty, drilled into him through discipline and sacrifice. It had been training, applied under pressure without concern for consequences. And more than anything, it had been character, something money couldn't buy or manufacture. As days passed, Victoria couldn't shake the contrast between her world and his. She had built companies, managed risk, and controlled outcomes. Yet her life had nearly ended despite all her resources. Ethan had lived quietly, unnoticed, yet carried skills capable of saving lives in seconds. She began to ask deeper questions, not just about him, but about others like him. Veterans who returned home with extraordinary abilities, only to disappear into ordinary jobs, unseen and unsupported. Weeks later, Victoria made a decision that surprised even her closest advisors. She announced the creation of a National Veterans Medical Foundation focused on emergency response training, mental health support, and rapid care programs. The funding was substantial, the scope ambitious. Publicly, the initiative was framed as philanthropy. Privately, she asked Ethan to serve as a silent advisor, shaping the program with his experience. He resisted at first, uncomfortable with involvement, but eventually agreed on one condition: no public recognition, no spotlight. Ethan never attended press conferences or stood on stages. He reviewed training models, advised on field readiness, and helped design programs that could save lives far from hospitals. At home, he remained the same father, packing lunches, or helping with homework and listening to his daughter talk about school. To him, the work was simply another way to serve, another extension of the values he had never abandoned. The world didn't need to know his name for the mission to matter. In time, the story of the gala faded from headlines, replaced by newer spectacles and louder scandals. But the impact remained, quietly expanding through lives touched by the Foundation's work. Victoria and Ethan spoke occasionally, their conversations respectful and grounded, built on mutual understanding rather than obligation. They both knew that moment had connected them, not through romance or drama, but through truth revealed under pressure. Because true heroes don't seek attention or applause. They don't announce themselves or demand credit. They stand up when others can't, act when time is short, and walk away when the moment has passed. Ethan Carter had revealed who he was in the only way that mattered. Not with words, but in action, at the exact moment when a life depended on it.